This is Rich Vernadeau, and I am doing a tribute to Michelle Wendy Haupt in this video. She was a victim of Bobby Lee Hines. She was killed by him on October 20th, 1991. He invaded her apartment using a stolen pass key in Carrollton, Texas, strangled her with speaker wire, and stabbed her 18 times with an ice pick. It was a horrendous crime. I never met Wendy. I do have a personal friend who lives in Austin who did know her, who had been at her apartment the night before she was killed. He had recorded her singing. He had even hooked up the speakers from which that speaker wire came, which Bobby Lee Hines used to strangle her. This was a horrendous crime. Bobby Lee Hines served 20 years on death row, Texas death row, almost, before he was finally executed. And this video is a tribute to Michelle Wendy Haupt. Let's remember the victim, Michelle Wendy Haupt, and not the perpetrator. It's this young woman who is to be memorialized here. Thank you very much. This is Rich Vernadeau.
Bobby Lee Hines didn't need to get a specific apartment key. He used a master key to the entire complex. That key allowed him to enter the Dallas apartment of 21-year-old Wendy Haupt, where he stabbed her to death with an ice pick in 1991. So how well do other complexes...
On October 19, 1991, Mary Ann Lynch went to the apartment of her friend Michelle Wendy Haupt in Carrollton, Texas, to spend the weekend. Lynch brought with her a Marlboro cigarette carton in which only 4 packs remained. She had purchased the cigarettes at Brookshire's in Corsicana, and the carton contained a stamp showing Brookshire's store on the side. Lynch left the carton at Haupt's apartment when they left that evening to go to a nightclub. Lynch had intended to return to Haupt's, but instead spent the night with another friend. Lynch testified that when they went to the club, Haupt was wearing a gold cent dollar charm necklace which she always wore. During the evening, Haupt became ill and another friend drove her back to her apartment. When he left, he testified that Haupt locked the door behind him. Meanwhile, at Haupt's apartment complex, Hines appeared uninvited at a party. When the hostess asked him who he was, he identified himself as the brother of the apartment manager. He told another guest that he was part of the maintenance crew at the complex. He pulled out a ring of keys and stated that he could get into any apartment that he wanted to at any time. At about 6 a.m. on October 20th, 1991, Haupt's next-door neighbor heard a woman screaming. He could not determine the source of the screams, but his wife called the police. 2 police officers were dispatched to the scene, but the screaming had ended before they arrived. After inspecting the premises, the officers could not determine where the screams had come from, and they eventually left. 2 other residents in the apartment directly below Haupt's also heard screaming loud enough to awaken them. One of the residents testified that he also heard other loud noises that sounded like a bowling ball being dropped on Haupt's floor. He heard this noise at least 20 times. The screaming lasted for approximately 15 minutes. The resident of an adjacent downstairs apartment also heard the screaming. Just before noon that morning, she and the other residents discussed what they had heard and became concerned for Haupt. Eventually, the apartment leasing manager was persuaded to check Haupt's apartment. After knocking and receiving no answer, the manager opened the door and saw Haupt lying on the floor just inside the door. A stereo cord was tightly wrapped around her neck, her face was black, and she appeared to be dead. Haupt was found dressed in only a robe and lying face up on the floor. There were puncture wounds to her chest area. The robe was stained with blood, but it had no holes to correspond with the puncture wounds to Haupt's body, indicating the robe was placed on her body after the wounds were inflicted. Further, the belt to the robe was tied tighter than a person would normally tie it against her own body. An object appearing to be an ice pick was found on the nearby couch. Hines' palm print was found inside Haupt's apartment in what appeared to be blood, and his thumbprint was found on the inside of the front door. Later that same day, Hines was found to be in possession of Haupt's gold and dollar charm. He had blood on some of his clothing and some other objects from Haupt's apartment, including the Brookshire's cigarette carton, were found under the couch where he had been sleeping. When Hines was arrested, he had a scratch under his right eye, scratches to the left side of his neck, and a scratch on his cheek. DNA testing conducted on a blood stain found on Hines' underwear indicated that the blood was consistent with Haupt's blood. The Dallas County Chief Medical Examiner testified that the cause of Haupt's death was strangulation and puncture wounds. Haupt had abrasions to her neck and jaw, contusions on her neck, and a fractured hyoid bone. She had about 18 puncture wounds. She had rectal tears with hemorrhaging. Barnard testified that the puncture wounds could have been made by the object found on the couch in Haupt's
convicted of the October 20, 1991 stabbing 17 times, and strangulation, with speaker cord, of Michelle Wendy Haupt at the Ash Tree Apartments on Country Square Drive in Carrollton, Texas. Research into the past criminal history of Bobby Lee Hines reveals a pattern of violence all the way back to junior high school in Paris, Texas, when Hines beat a kid senseless in the bleachers so severely that it took 2 adult coaches to pull Bobby off the kid whose head was between the stands, and Bobby kept hitting him and banging his head back and forth. Then there was an incident in January 1990 in which an adult male victim at a small isolated house was attacked, beaten and left unconscious by Bobby Lee Hines.
Bobby Lee Hines didn't need to get a specific apartment key. He used a master key to the entire complex. That key allowed him to enter the Dallas apartment of 21-year-old Wendy Haupt, where he stabbed her to death with an ice pick in 1991. So how well do other complexes